Marisol Alvarez always thought that her life was a series of impossible odds, each day a battle between the challenges of single motherhood and the weight of a justice system she barely understood. On a humid summer afternoon in Los Angeles, Marisol's world was already turned upside down before fate delivered its cruel verdict. Standing in a crowded courtroom where every face seemed to mirror confusion and quiet sympathy, she listened in stunned disbelief as Judge Raymond Calloway read out her sentence. The charges were minor, a procedural mishap blown out of proportion, and yet here she was, a single mother facing jail time. The courtroom murmured a cacophony of whispers as the gavel came down like a final, merciless stroke, and even Marisol's trembling hands could not stifle a gasp of incredulity. Every eye was fixed on her, reporters jostling with secret cameras, legal experts scribbling hurried notes, and onlookers consumed by the spectacle of a system that somehow had failed the very person who needed mercy the most. But what unfolded over the next several days would take this tragic episode into the realm of the unbelievable. In the days that followed, Marisol refused to be defined by the injustice of that moment. Instead, she turned her despair into determination, reaching deep inside herself for the strength to fight. With her smartphone in hand, Marisol recorded a raw and unfiltered message on TikTok, a testimony of her experience in court and the shocking cruelty of an indifferent legal system. In that video, she appeared vulnerable yet resolute, her eyes burning with the fire of a woman who had nothing left to lose, but everything to prove. The video, posted from a cramped, sunlit living room decorated with the loving fingerprints of a mother's everyday life, quickly went viral. In a matter of hours, it reached millions. Social media platforms exploded with outrage, sympathy, and demands for justice. The hashtag Justice for Marisol trended worldwide as millions resonated with her story. The gust of public sentiment was as relentless as it was unpredictable, igniting a wildfire of protests, petitions, and calls to hold someone accountable in the face of blatant injustice. While citizens rallied behind her floating hope of reform, legal experts began to circle, dissecting every detail of Judge Calloway's conduct. Rumors abounded that he had a history of questionable behavior, that perhaps his temper had once been documented, and his decisions skewed by personal prejudice. As news outlets pounced on the story, the case became emblematic of a broader struggle, a microcosm of a society wrestling with the complexities of power, privilege, and accountability. Marisol's profile, once defined solely by the hardships of single motherhood and survival, was abruptly transformed. She became an unwilling symbol of justice undone, a beacon that shone light on the darker corners of a gavel-bound institution. But behind the viral frenzy was a very real human story, a mother whose love for her daughter Isabella and her unwavering resolve had taken her from the margins of society to its very center. The trial itself, which had once been intended to be a routine display of legal authority, was quickly rebranded as a high-stakes drama that held the nation in thrall. In the weeks that followed the viral explosion, legal teams mobilized on both sides, the scales of justice trembling under the weight of public opinion and media scrutiny. Marisol's attorney, Sylvia Martinez, emerged as a fierce advocate who argued that the original sentence was disproportionate to any offense, a relic of a system that had long been out of touch with modern values. Sylvia's courtroom performance was as passionate as it was articulate, drawing comparisons to legendary defense attorneys who had once fought tooth and nail against oppression. Her closing arguments eloquently painted a picture of systemic failure, linking Marisol's personal plight to a larger narrative about prosecutorial overreach and judicial hubris. The case also triggered a chain reaction among political leaders and reform advocates. As televised debates splashed headlines and expert opinions across every network, Judge Calloway's past judgments were meticulously re-examined. Through a combination of furious social media campaigns and tireless investigative reporting, a hidden archive of biased rulings, questionable sentencing practices, and informal dealings with influential figures emerged. For many, the once respected jurist had become a walking caricature of judicial arrogance, a man who treated the courtroom as his private stage to dispense arbitrary punishments. Deep within legal archives and whispered conversations among legal insiders, it was revealed that Calloway had, on more than one occasion, deviated from accepted legal standards. His impartiality, once assumed as a given by those who trusted the system, was now under a microscope. Even as the legal community grappled with these revelations, Marisol, now both a convict and a crusader, found a way to navigate her challenging new identity. Every day in her small apartment became a lesson in resilience. The faded wallpaper, adorned with a few remnants of happier times, now bore witness to her evolving strength and her ardent determination not to allow her future to be dictated by one unjust ruling. As she attended meetings with legal teams, advocacy groups, and even sympathetic lawmakers, Marisol began to see that her plight was not just about her own life, but about the lives of countless others who had been trampled under the roof of an overzealous legal system. Isabella, a bright-eyed girl of 8, watched her mother's transformation with a blend of childlike wonder and quiet pride. Although the details of legal battles and judicial misconduct were far beyond her comprehension, the empathy instilled in her by loving care and small moments of shared laughter was a testament to their unbreakable bond. Every evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in warm hues, Marisol would sit down with Isabella, recounting stories of hope and courage, instilling in her the belief that justice, though sometimes delayed or denied, was worth fighting for. Their intertwined destinies, marked by hardship and fortified by an unyielding spirit, became the cornerstone of a movement that would soon reach far beyond the borders of their modest neighborhood. Meanwhile, Judge Calloway's previously unassailable reputation began to crumble under the relentless barrage of public inquiry. The professional body responsible for overseeing judicial conduct, initially reluctant to rock the boat, was forced to confront the weight of mounting evidence against him. Allegations of misconduct were corroborated by testimonies from former court staff and leaked internal memos that hinted at a troubling pattern of favoritism and unchecked arrogance. As the legal world braced itself for the inevitable fallout, Calloway made a series of public statements that were as nonsensical as they were self-aggrandizing. However, his attempts to justify his decisions only served to deepen the public's disdain. When the day of reckoning finally arrived, it was not in the form of a traditional appeal, but in the spectacular downfall of a man who once believed himself infallible. The Bar Association, overwhelmed by the tide of evidence and public outcry, was forced to convene an emergency hearing. In a dramatic session that captivated audiences nationwide, the association's disciplinary panel unanimously voted to disbar Judge Calloway. The announcement was met with jubilant cheers at public rallies, a vindication for many who had suffered quietly at the hands of an unchecked system. And yet, even as the dust settled on one front, for Marisol, the victory was bittersweet. The loss of a judge who had once held her fate in his hands did little to erase the scars carved by her experiences, scars that would serve as permanent reminders of the cost of systemic injustice. In the whirlwind that followed, as reforms were teased and promises of a better, fairer future began to circulate, Marisol found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. There was elation for the ex-judge's fall, yet she was tormented by memories of her own humiliation and the pain inflicted on her and Isabella. In quiet moments, when the weight of the past pressed down upon her, she would doubt whether the sacrifices made, the long nights of solitary reflection, the overwhelming grief, and the paralyzing fear of a system that had once seemed impenetrable, had been worth it. But with every tear that fell, a renewed determination arose, and with every setback, a vision of radical change was born. She began working closely with advocacy organizations, recounting her story at town hall meetings and national events, urging for judicial reforms that would ensure no other single mother, or any citizen for that matter, would ever face the same dehumanizing fate. This complex tapestry of tumult and hope was further enriched by new relationships that blossomed in the aftermath of the scandal. Sylvia Martinez, whose impassioned defense of Marisol had inspired countless legal watchdogs, found herself at the epicenter of a broader movement for systemic change. Together with Marisol, they embarked on a nationwide speaking tour, visiting universities, legal forums, and even recording sessions for televised interviews. Their shared journey was one of catharsis and defiance, a testament to the possibility of redemption, both for the system and for those brave enough to question it. In one poignant moment from that tour, during a gathering at a historic civic center in a Midwestern city, an older woman who had once been a victim of a similar miscarriage of justice stood up amidst the sea of protesters and supporters. With quavering but confident eyes, she recounted how decades ago she too had been crushed under the weight of an unjust verdict. Marisol listened intently, her heart heavy with the realization that she was not isolated in her struggles. Her pain was woven into a long tapestry of voices that had risen over time in defiance. That day, the room resonated with tears of shared sorrow, but also with a palpable unity, a gathering of souls committed to ensuring that justice, in all its measured fairness, would prevail. Beyond the courtroom and the public rallies, quiet pockets of resistance continued to flourish in small communities across the nation. Local libraries, community centers, and even neighborhood coffee shops became informal hubs where people discussed the ramifications of Callaway's disbarment and the urgent need for genuine judicial oversight. In these settings, Marisol's video had evolved from a moment of personal anguish into a rallying cry, a symbol of undeniable truth that empowered even the smallest voices to demand accountability. With every retelling of her story, whether in hushed conversations or in impassioned debate, the legacy of that fateful day in the courtroom expanded, gradually morphing from a singular moment into a profound catalyst for change. Yet, as the movement gained momentum, it also faced the perennial challenges of sustaining its transformative energy in the face of entrenched opposition. Detractors, including some hardened members of the judicial community, questioned whether the fervor surrounding the case was nothing more than a transient media frenzy, an anomaly that risked being forgotten when the next legal crisis emerged. But for those who had lived the reality of systemic disregard, the stakes were all too clear. In backrooms of legislative sessions and during whispered strategy meetings among reformers, there emerged a consensus that reform was not only urgent, it was crucial for the survival of a justice system meant to serve, not punish, the vulnerable. Marisol, now an inadvertent spokesperson for a new breed of justice advocates, traveled to state capitals armed not with retribution but with the hope of dialogue. In impromptu town hall meetings and carefully orchestrated symposiums, she spoke candidly about her experiences, her eyes reflecting the quiet determination of someone who had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. Her words resonated with legislators who, despite their differences, came to see the undeniable evidence of a system that was fractured, one desperately in need of renewal. The message was simple yet powerful. Every person, regardless of their socioeconomic status or personal history, deserved compassion, fairness, and the right to be heard. At a turning point in the saga, when public support for Marisol reached a fever pitch, and the political landscape appeared to be on the cusp of a major overhaul, an unexpected twist unfurled. An anonymous tip, delivered in the form of a meticulously composed email, alleged that there were additional, hitherto undisclosed layers of corruption within the judicial process at large. The email hinted at connections between certain influential lobbyists and a network of legal professionals who had worked in tandem to ensure that the interests of the powerful always trumped the rights of the individual. Investigative journalists quickly picked up the thread, and soon media outlets were publishing in-depth reports that chronicled a history of manipulation, financial incentives, and hidden alliances that extended well beyond the confines of one judge's chamber. The revelations sent shockwaves through every corner of the legal profession, compelling even the most seasoned cynics to reevaluate the very foundation of justice in the land. As these revelations took center stage, Marisol's life entered a period of intense turbulence. For a moment, it seemed that her story might be subsumed by the larger scandal, that her struggle, though significant, would simply become fodder for an even more expansive investigation. Yet, even in this maelstrom of uncertainty, Marisol refused to let her voice be silenced. With the same fierce determination that had carried her from a condemned courtroom to the halls of activism, she embraced her new role as a guardian of truth. Emblazoned with the scars of her ordeal, but empowered by the knowledge that her suffering had ignited a beacon of change, she continued to speak out, offering heartfelt testimonies and calling for comprehensive reforms to dismantle the networks of abuse that had for so long manipulated justice for private gain. In the midst of legal debates, media storms, and the relentless scrutiny of her every move, Marisol found solace in small personal acts of rebellion. She reclaimed moments of joy by teaching Isabella to dance in the living room beneath the soft glow of twilight, where laughter became an act of protest, a declaration that even though the system might fail them, love and resilience would always rise above. Each tender embrace between mother and daughter, each whispered bedtime story, was a silent challenge to a society that had sought to strip them of their dignity. Deep in her heart, Marisol recognized that while her battle against injustice was far from over, every step forward was a victory against the forces that had attempted to break her spirit. As the campaign for judicial reform gathered critical mass, lawmakers began to introduce proposals for sweeping changes. These included measures to increase transparency in the judicial process, mandatory sensitivity training for judges, and the establishment of independent oversight committees designed to root out corruption before it could fester. Marisol weathered the roller coaster of public life with quiet grace, often retreating to the sanctuary of her modest apartment, where she could gather her thoughts and plan her next move. She had learned that the journey toward true justice would require more than impassioned speeches and viral videos. It demanded a sustained, collective effort from every member of society, a willingness to hold power accountable at every level. In a final, heart-stopping chapter of this turbulent saga, Marisol found herself back in a courtroom, this time as a witness in a grand investigation into the network of corruption that had long haunted the judicial system. The stark, cold walls of the court bore witness to the transformed narrative of a once-forgotten victim who had risen to become the voice of a desperate movement. As she testified with quiet determination, her words echoed with the gravity of lived experience and the promise of redemption. Each syllable carried the weight of countless hours of hardship and hope, challenging the assembled officials to confront the deep-seated injustice that lurked beneath the veneer of legal propriety. The moment was historic, a convergence of individual sacrifice and collective awakening that would mark a turning point for generations to come. Outside the courtroom, as the battered gavel of the old regime was replaced by a new pledge to transparency and reform, a sense of profound possibility permeated the air. Protesters and supporters, spanning the age spectrum and drawn from every walk of life, celebrated with tears and laughter mingling in the humid evening air. For Marisol, the victory was not just personal. It was emblematic of a societal rebirth, a clarion call that the voices of the oppressed could never truly be silenced by the weight of injustice. As the crowd dispersed into the city's winding streets, the echoes of their chants reverberated like a promise that the story of one single mom, once punished by an indifferent system, would live on as a beacon of hope and an enduring catalyst for change. Over the succeeding months, as the dust of scandal and despair slowly gave way to cautious optimism, Marisol's story continued to influence policy debates and legal reforms. Her perseverance, tempered by both sorrow and the joy of rekindled hope, became a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt marginalized by the corridors of power. With every new piece of legislation introduced in her honor, with every reform that cracked open a long-forgotten door, the framework of the legal system began to shift imperceptibly but irrevocably towards a more balanced justice. Marisol ever remained at the heart of this evolving landscape, a living testament to the power of one individual to spark the kind of transformation that outlasts even the harshest sentences and the darkest moments of despair. In quiet moments of reflection, Marisol would recall that fateful day in the courtroom, the overwhelming sense of dread, the echo of the gavel, and the silent promise she made to herself that she would never again be a passive casualty of a flawed system. Each day after that judgment had been an arduous lesson in resilience, a painful yet empowering reminder that true justice was forged in the crucible of personal sacrifice. Even as the echoes of vengeance and retribution faded into a broader conversation about accountability, her story endured. It told a tale not only of a single mother's struggle against unjust condemnation, but of an entire nation's awakening to the necessity of compassion, fairness, and transparency in every facet of governance. Looking back on the arduous journey, from the crushing humiliation of an unjust sentencing to the triumphant, if bittersweet, fall of a once-regarded judge, Marisol realized that her narrative had grown far beyond the confines of a single courtroom drama. Instead, it had become a universal call to arms, one that spoke of the dignity of every individual and the enduring strength that emerges when people come together to demand genuine justice. And though there would always be scars left by the ordeal, those very wounds had given rise to a resilient spirit, a symbol of hope that could withstand the most relentless storms of adversity. In the twilight of one particularly reflective afternoon, as Marisol sat watching Isabella scribble happily on a battered notepad, a habit formed from a thirst for unfiltered creativity, she considered the layered meanings of her own journey. Life, in all its painful complexities, had taught her that justice was not simply served in the quiet decree of a judge's sentence, nor in the fleeting triumphs of a viral video. Instead, it was nurtured in the small, often unseen acts of everyday courage, a shared smile amidst adversity, a whispered word of reassurance in the depths of despair, and the unwavering belief that every voice, no matter how small, possessed the power to transform a broken system. As the nation moved inexorably forward, inspired by the revelations of corruption and buoyed by the determined cries for reform, Marisol's name became synonymous with resilience. Legal scholars debated the ramifications of the Callaway scandal for years to come, using it as a case study to examine the intersections of power, media, and justice. Documentaries were produced that recounted not simply the fall of a corrupt judge, but the enduring legacy of a single mom whose courage had galvanized an entire generation to demand accountability. In classrooms, young law students studied her case, analyzing every twist and turn as a lesson in the inherent responsibilities embedded within the legal profession. And in quiet living rooms across the country, everyday citizens recounted her story with a mixture of admiration and resolve, reminders that the fight to uphold true justice was a legacy that transcended individual cases. The journey was far from over, and while Marisol knew that every victory was tethered to new challenges, she embraced the future with open arms and a determined heart. In her own words, shared in a follow-up video that rippled across social media like a renewed breath of optimism, she expressed gratitude for the profound changes that had been set in motion. "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a testament to the power of our collective voices," she said, her voice steady and infused with a quiet conviction. Today, as we turn the page on one chapter of injustice, we begin drafting a new narrative, one in which the principles of compassion, integrity, and fairness form the cornerstone of our society. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. Let our shared struggle pave the way for a future in which every individual, no matter how small or unheard, is given the justice they deserve. In the months and years that followed, reforms inspired by Marisol's unyielding courage took root in communities large and small, gradually transforming an antiquated system into one that strove to reflect the ever-evolving values of a society committed to compassion and equality. Though there remained lingering echoes of the past, the memory of a judge who had once sentenced a single mom to a painful oblivion, the new framework was characterized by openness, engagement, and the ceaseless pursuit of truth. The story of Judge Callaway's disbarment became more than a cautionary tale. It evolved into an enduring chronicle of transformation, a narrative etched in the annals of legal history as a moment when the scales of justice tilted irrevocably in favor of accountability and respect for human dignity. As Marisol walked the bustling streets of her neighborhood, every step imbued with the knowledge that she had helped spark monumental changes, she took solace in the simple certainties of life. The gentle laughter of children in nearby parks, the encouraging nods of neighbors who had also witnessed the stirring of reform, they were the quiet acknowledgments that every storm eventually recedes to reveal a landscape renewed by hope. In that transformed world, the legacy of one single mom and the fall of a despotic judge became intertwined, a shared memory that no amount of time or regret could ever erase. Standing at the crossroads of her old grief and new responsibility, Marisol contemplated the enduring impact of her journey. With every tear shed in moments of vulnerability, She had discovered a reservoir of strength. With every question raised against an unjust authority, she had forged a path to a more equitable tomorrow. And as dusk melted into the promise of a new dawn, the echoes of her struggle whispered a timeless truth, that true justice, though it may be hard-earned and painfully fought for, is an unassailable right, a right that must be defended at all costs, even if it comes at the expense of great personal sacrifice. In the quiet aftermath of a harrowing legal battle, when the clamor of media frenzy had finally subsided into measured reflection, Marisol found that her personal narrative had merged with a larger collective ambition, a desire that no subsequent generation should ever have to endure the indignity of a misplaced judgment. The courtroom, the echo of an unjust gavel, and the viral video that had so unexpectedly set the wheels of change in motion were all now part of a tapestry depicting the ceaseless evolution of society towards something nobler and more humane. And as every voice that had risen in protest continued to reverberate through halls of power and public debate, Marisol's indomitable spirit remained a beacon, a brilliant reminder that every individual, no matter how insignificant they once seemed, held within them the power to reshape destiny. Thus, the saga of Judge Calloway's downfall and the inspiring journey of a single mother, resilient in the face of injustice, became inseparable chapters of a larger history, one that taught people to question authority, to persist despite overwhelming odds, and to always strive for a world where every human heartbeat was valued. And in the legacy of that turbulent time, as reform measured in painstaking steps replaced the old callous order, it was clear to all who listened that the true measure of justice lay not in the imposition of harsh sentences, but in the compassionate embrace of truth, accountability, and hope. While the chapters of that tumultuous era ultimately provided a canvas for profound reflection and radical change, the personal journey of Marisol and the transformative impact of her viral testimony remained. Etched in collective memory, it was a narrative replete with heartbreak, determination, and the indefatigable power of the human spirit, a story that would inspire future generations to wield their voices as weapons against injustice, no matter how seemingly insurmountable the challenges. In every whispered recollection, in every recounting of that historic moment, when one TikTok video toppled an unaccountable judge, there lay a message of invincible hope, a declaration that even in the bleakest of hours, the spark of resistance could ignite a revolution of the heart. And so, as the tapestry of time wove on, the legacy of that fateful courtroom session and Marisol's courageous response continued to inspire changes in the legal landscape. The memory of a single mom sentenced to jail, whose defiant video unraveled the web of corruption spun by a once powerful judge, became a thesis in the ongoing struggle for justice. A symbolic tale urging society to build a future where compassion holds sway over cruelty, and every voice, no matter how soft, resonates with the might of truth. In quiet neighborhoods and bustling urban centers alike, Marisol's name was spoken with reverence and gratitude. Mothers, fathers, and children would recall her journey as a lesson in resilience, a call to rise above adversity, to challenge injustice head-on, and to never let the darkness of flawed institutions extinguish the light of hope. For in the annals of history, where narratives of pain and triumph intertwine, hers shone brightest, a living testament to the change that can be born from the simplest acts of defiance and honesty. And so, as our story draws to a gentle close, the lives touched by that fateful incident continue to echo its lessons in every sphere, within the corridors of justice, the halls of activism, and the hearts of those who believe in the transformative power of a single, steadfast voice. The journey of a single mom whose pain turned into a movement, and of a judge whose fall forever altered the course of legal history, remains a powerful reminder that every injustice, when met with unwavering courage, possesses the inherent power to kindle a revolution, lighting the path to a more just and compassionate world.